Close your eyes now and let the heaviness of the day simply drop away from your shoulders, sinking into the mattress beneath you like a stone, settling into soft river mud. For here in this quiet space, there is nothing you need to solve and nowhere you need to be, just the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the dark, velvety wrap of the night. You are safe here, anchored in the warmth. But outside, beyond the walls of this room, the world is vast and old, and the wind that brushes against your window pane is the same wind that has circled this earth for millions of years, carrying stories of ice and stone that we have almost forgotten. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let your breath slow down, deeper and easier, as we let the present moment dissolve like mist on a morning lake, drifting backward, not in a rush, but with the slow, inevitable pull of a tide retreating from the shore. We are moving back, past the noise of the modern city, past the iron and the glass, past the first stone walls and the first planted fields, drifting deeper into the blue-gray silence of 25,000 years ago, where the air itself feels different against your skin, sharper, thinner, and holding a dry, static charge that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Imagine you are standing on a high ridge, looking out over a world that is familiar yet utterly alien, illuminated not by streetlights, but by the colossal spilling tapestry of the Milky Way, so bright and heavy it feels like you could reach up and rake your fingers through the stars. The air here smells of crushed granite and dry yellow grass, a scent entirely void of moisture, for the water of the world is being stolen, locked away in great white vaults to the north, and the silence is so profound it rings in the ears, broken only by the dry hiss of wind over the permafrost and the occasional sharp crack of ice expanding in the distance, a sound like a gunshot in a cathedral. We often imagine the Ice Age arriving like a sudden storm, a wall of frost slamming the door on the world we knew, vivid and terrifying. But the truth seems slower, quieter, and far more unsettling. For this was not a disaster that happened in a day, but a gradual creeping theft of warmth that spanned generations, so subtle that a child born into it might not realize the world was colder than it had been for her grandmother. Only that the winters were longer, the snows deeper, and the summers merely a pale, brief ghost of what they once were. It feels less like a catastrophe and more like the earth is slowly holding its breath, inhaling the oceans and exhaling only dust and cold. To the north, invisible from where we stand but felt as a heavy, brooding presence on the horizon, lie the great ice sheets, glaciers 2 miles thick that have crushed the forests and flattened the mountains of what we would one day call Scandinavia and Canada, burying the land under a weight so immense it actually bends the Earth's crust downwards, a slow-motion geological crush that happens too quietly to hear. The temperature here, in the heart of Europe, has fallen to 15 degrees colder than the world you know, a drop so severe it has rewritten the biology of the continent, turning familiar woodlands into a vast, dry mammoth steppe that stretches from Spain to Siberia, a single endless biome of wind-sculpted grass and hardy sagebrush that shimmers like a sea of gold and gray under the moonlight. You can feel the cold on your face now, not a wet, shivering dampness, but a piercing, dry freeze that instantly tightens the skin, a cold that seeks to enter the bones, yet there is a beauty in it, a stark, crystalline clarity where the moonlight reflects off the snow with a brilliance that turns the night into a blue-gray day. It seems impossible that anything could live here, that the fragile, soft machinery of the human body could endure a single night in this open void. And yet, look closer at the landscape, specifically at that small, flickering point of orange light miles away in the valley floor. A tiny, defiant heartbeat in the vast body of the winter. Humans are here, and they are not merely hiding in caves, shivering in the dark as the popular imagination often paints them, but they are walking, working, and watching, standing tall against the wind with a quiet confidence that we have forgotten we possess. It is easy to think of them as desperate, clawing for survival in a hostile hellscape, but as we drift closer, the feeling is not one of panic, but of a deep, rhythmic integration with the cold, a sense that they do not fight the ice so much as flow within it, understanding its rules better than we understand the traffic patterns of our own cities. The change came slowly, creeping down from the pole century by century, stealing the birch trees first, then the pines, until only the dwarf willows and the lichen remained, and the people adapted with the same slow fluidity, their tools changing shape, their clothes growing heavier, their knowledge of the cold deepening until it was not an enemy, but a home. We stand here on the edge of this transformation, watching the familiar green world fade into white, and it feels as though the sun itself has grown distant, a pale coin rolling along the southern horizon, barely rising high enough to cast a shadow before dipping back down into the earth. The days are short, precious bursts of golden light that illuminate the vast herds of animals moving like rivers across the plains, woolly mammoths, their breath steaming like locomotives, bison with shoulders like boulders, and reindeer flowing in the thousands, all driven by the same invisible clock that governs the ice. There's a tension here, a feeling that the earth has tipped past a point of no return, that the warm interlude is over, and the long winter has truly settled in, sealing the continents in a grip that will not loosen for 10,000 years. We are witnessing the world becoming hostile to our kind of biology, stripping away the fruit and the easy warmth, demanding a new kind of human, one who can stitch, who can plan, and who can carry fire not just in their hands, but in their minds. The wind picks up, lifting plumes of fine gray loess dust that swirls in the twilight like dancing ghosts, coating everything in a fine powder that glitters in the failing light. And you realize that this is not a temporary weather front, but a new geological reality, a planet that has fundamentally changed its state. The silence of the steppe is not empty. It is pregnant with waiting, holding the potential for both death and extraordinary life. And as the stars wheel overhead, crisp and hard as diamonds, you get the sense that something irreversible has already begun. A great locking down of the water and the warmth, unnoticed by the earth itself, but felt keenly by the skin of every living thing that dares to remain. The descent into the white world is complete, and now we must learn to breathe the air of a different time, to walk on ground that rings like iron underfoot, and to find the warmth that exists not in the sun, but in the blood and the bone and the knowledge passed from hand to hand in the dark. As we drift further into this vast, pale silence, moving low over the frozen ground like a bird gliding on a downdraft, the first thing you notice is not the ice itself, but the unexpected golden shimmer of the world, for we are not floating over a buried wasteland of deep, impassable snow as we might have feared, but rather a landscape that feels impossibly open, a seemingly infinite ocean of dry, waving grass that stretches from the edge of Ireland all the way across Europe and Asia to the distant shores of Alaska. This is the Mammoth Steppe, the largest contiguous biome the Earth has ever known, a unique ecosystem that has vanished entirely from the modern world. And to look upon it now is to witness a contradiction that feels strange to our modern eyes, a place of biting, lethal cold that is simultaneously exploding with life, vibrating with a biological energy that rivals the heat-soaked savannas of Africa. Because the great ice sheets to the north have locked away so much moisture, the air here is incredibly dry, meaning that heavy snowfalls are rare in the interior, and the wind, that tireless sculptor of the prehistoric world, sweeps the plains bare, exposing the nutrient-rich grasses and sedges to the weak winter sun, turning the landscape into a patchwork of gray earth and yellow stalks that hiss softly in the breeze. It is a world of extremes, yes, but also a world of abundance, and as we move silently across the terrain, the ground begins to tremble, a low-frequency thrumming that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears, the sound of thousands of heavy hooves striking the permafrost. Emerging from the twilight mist, they appear first as dark, moving hills, then as distinct shapes. The woolly mammoths, the undisputed architects of this cold world, their shaggy coats matted with frost and dust, their long, curved tusks sweeping the snow aside like scythes to reach the preserved grass beneath. They move with a slow, hypnotic grace, immense families bound by deep, silent communication, their breath rising in synchronized plumes of steam that hang in the still air like low clouds. Watching them, it seems less like they are fighting the winter and more like they are wearing it, their bodies perfectly engineered to retain heat, their small ears hidden in fur, their massive bulk acting as a thermal battery that carries them through the long, dark nights. But they are not alone in this golden ocean. Look to the periphery, and you will see the others, the herds of bison with their humped shoulders facing into the wind, the erratic, flowing rivers of reindeer, whose antlers clatter like dry branches, and the small, sturdy horses with coats as thick as plush velvet, standing watchful and still. It is a staggering amount of meat and muscle on the hoof, a density of life that scientists today still struggle to fully explain, debating how such a frozen landscape could support a biomass so vast that it would crush the carrying capacity of a modern Arctic tundra. Perhaps it was the sun, which, though cold, shone for 24 hours a day in the summer, fueling a frantic, explosive bloom of high-protein wildflowers and sagebrush. Or perhaps it was the animals themselves, whose trampling feet broke up the moss and churned the soil, gardening their own pasture in a cycle of destruction and renewal that kept the steppe alive. We see the predators too, the shadows that detach themselves from the rocks, the cave lions, larger and more muscular than their African cousins, watching the herds with heavy-lidded patience, and the short-faced bears, terrifying giants who stride with a rolling gait that suggests they fear nothing on this earth. And yet, amidst this titan struggle of megafauna, there is a smaller, quieter presence, barely visible unless you know where to look. On a ridge overlooking the migration, a handful of human figures crouch low in the scrub, wrapped so tightly in furs they look like part of the landscape, motionless as stones. They are not the masters of this domain, not yet. They are merely a part of its metabolism, small and fragile organisms navigating a world of giants, watching the herds with eyes that are not filled with the savage hunger of the wolf, but with the calculating, memory-rich assessment of the engineer. They know that the steppe is not just a hunting ground, but a map of survival, a constantly shifting puzzle where the movement of the herds dictates the movement of the people, where the arrival of the bison marks the season as surely as the position of the stars. They do not chase the animals in a chaotic sprint, they flow with them, anticipating their path, understanding that in this environment, energy is the most precious currency of all, and to waste it on a failed pursuit is to court death. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of wild sage and damp wool, a smell that is ancient and clean, and you can see one of the figures shift slightly, adjusting a hood, perhaps whispering a quiet observation to a companion, a tiny gesture of communication in a world of immense silence. It is a moment of profound connection, realizing that these people are not aliens, but us, stripping away the cities and the noise to reveal the core of human resilience, the ability to find a foothold in a world that offers no quarter. The light begins to change, the pale sun dipping just below the horizon to create a long, lingering twilight that turns the snow to lavender and the grass to copper. And for a moment, the violence of the cold is forgotten in the sheer, overwhelming beauty of the scene, a planet in its rawest, most honest state. There's a sense of deep time here, a feeling that this procession of life has been moving across these plains for eternity, and will continue forever, a cycle of grass and ice and blood that requires no witnesses to be holy. We drift over them, these ancestors of ours, and we feel a strange, protective affection, for they look so small against the backdrop of the glaciers, tiny sparks of consciousness in a universe of ice. Yet they are not afraid. They are home. They understand the language of the wind and the geometry of the snowdrifts. They know which lichens can be eaten and which hollows offer shelter from the gale. As the stars begin to reassert themselves in the deepening blue above, the herds settle into their nightly rhythm, the mothers nudging their calves into the center of the warmth, the sentries taking their posts, and the great silence descends once more. Not an empty silence, but a living one, filled with the heartbeat of a world that is resting but never sleeping. We are drifting across a map that has no borders, only the natural boundaries of ice and sea, a seamless continuity of life that flows over the curve of the earth, ignoring the lines we would one day draw on paper. And in this vast connected openness, we find a strange kind of peace, a realization that life, no matter how harsh the conditions, is stubborn, persistent, and beautifully, defiantly enduring. Drifting further now, we follow the direction of the wind, moving away from the heart of the continent toward where the edge of the world should be, expecting to find the gray, churning barrier of the ocean. But as we travel, the coastline refuses to appear, retreating before us like a mirage that is always just out of reach. We are entering the realm of the vanishing seas, a time when the oceans of the earth have been drained to feed the insatiable hunger of the ice sheets, the water locked away in frozen vaults miles high, dropping the global sea level by over 120 meters. It is a change so profound that it has redrawn the map of the planet entirely, erasing the blue boundaries that separate nations in our time and replacing them with vast rolling plains of sedge and willow that connect the isolated families of the earth into a single contiguous story. Look down now and realize with a quiet shiver of awe that you are floating over the bottom of the North Sea, a place where, in our time, trawlers drag their nets through dark, cold water and oil rigs stand on spindly legs against the waves. But here, under the pale Ice Age sky, it is a rich, habitable valley known to us as Doggerland, a lost Atlantis that is not a city of gold, but a hunter's paradise of winding rivers and foggy wetlands. We see the great rivers of Europe, the Rhine, the Thames, the Seine, not emptying into the sea where we expect them to, but flowing on, carving deep meandering channels across this exposed continental shelf, joining together in a braided super river that winds its way north before finally meeting the retreated Atlantic hundreds of miles away. It feels dreamlike, this ghost geography, to walk on dry land where today whales swim, to see herds of red deer grazing in a valley that will one day be the English Channel, crossing from France to Britain without ever wetting their hooves. To the people living here, this is not a land bridge or a temporary crossing. It is simply the world, solid and enduring, a home where generations are born and die without ever knowing that an ocean waits in the wings to reclaim it. They camp on the banks of these extended rivers, their fires flickering in the lowlands that offer shelter from the biting steppe winds, unaware that they are sleeping on the floor of a future sea. And if we cast our gaze much further east, spanning the globe in a single thought, we find an even greater connection, the massive subcontinent of Beringia, linking Asia to the Americas not by a fragile, narrow strip of land as the old maps used to show, but by a territory twice the size of Texas, a vast, stable refuge of shrub tundra and steppe that sits high and dry above the waterline. It is a place of strange stillness, blocked from the moisture of the Pacific by mountains, creating a dry, grassy sanctuary where the ice sheets do not reach. Here, in this land between worlds, the genetic history of a continent is pausing, waiting, and deepening. It seems that the ancestors of the Americas did not sprint across this land in a race to the New World, but rather lived here for thousands of years, a distinctive population isolated by ice on one side and ocean on the other, becoming a unique people in the crucible of this sunken continent. We can imagine them there, huddled in the leeward calm of a hill that is now an island in the Bering Strait, telling stories that have since been washed away by the rising tides, their lives played out on a stage that no longer exists. There is a melancholy beauty in this, the realization that much of the human story from this time is lost not because we haven't found it, but because it is drowned, hidden beneath hundreds of feet of salt water, the campsites and the kill sites and the graves of thousands of years preserved only in the silent, pressurized dark of the ocean floor. But here, in the moment we are witnessing, the land is vibrant and alive, a corridor of connection where ideas and genes flow as freely as the wind. We see the tracks of the woolly rhinoceros stamped into the mud of what is now the Sea of Japan, and the footprints of children chasing hares across the dry floor of the Persian Gulf. The isolation of the continents has ended. The separation of the world is healed by the ice, creating a planetary supercontinent of accessibility where a person could theoretically walk from the tip of South Africa to the southern coast of Chile without ever needing a boat, provided they could survive the journey. It is a world of unity born from catastrophe, a paradox where the harshest climate in human history has created the greatest opportunity for expansion, opening doors that had been locked for millions of years. The atmosphere here feels heavy, perhaps because the air pressure is higher at this lower elevation, or perhaps it is the weight of the destiny that hangs over these lands, the knowledge we hold that this configuration is fleeting. The rivers that cut through these exposed shelves are teeming with life, migratory fish running in numbers that stagger the imagination, unhindered by dams or pollution, feeding the bears and the birds and the people who gather at the water's edge. We can hear the sound of the water, a low, rushing constant that grounds the listener in the physical reality of the place. It is not a myth. It is wet, cold rock and sandy loam. It is the smell of decaying marsh grass and the sharp tang of peat. In the distance, the white wall of the glaciers glows faintly on the horizon, a reminder of the thief that has stolen the sea. But here in the lowlands, life finds a way to flourish in the shelter of the exposed earth. It feels intimate, this walking on the seabed, a privilege of memory that allows us to see the skeleton of the planet laid bare, to understand the true shape of the land before the water softened its edges. There are no borders here, no lines on a map, only the natural barriers of ice and wind, and the people move through this landscape with a fluidity that we have lost, following the seasons, following the herds, unaware that they are travelers on a bridge that is destined to burn. The silence of these lost lands is profound, a hushed expectancy that hangs over the valleys of Doggerland and the plains of Beringia, a sense that the earth is holding this shape only for a moment, a deep breath taken between the warm periods of history. As we drift over the campfires of the people living on the shelf, watching the sparks rise up to join the stars, we feel a sudden, sharp connection to them, realizing that our own world is just as fragile, just as subject to the whims of the ice and the sea, and that the solid ground beneath our feet is only solid because the water allows it to be. The wind shifts again, carrying the salt smell of the distant, retreated ocean, a reminder that the water is waiting, patient and heavy, to return to its ancient bed. But for now, for this long, frozen moment, the world is connected, the doors are open, and humanity is quietly, unknowingly, walking across the bottom of the sea to find its future. The wind here does not blow so much as it presses, a constant physical weight against the chest that reminds you, with every inhalation, that you are a stranger in this latitude, a biological anomaly wandering far from the warm, wet cradle where your species was born. As we let the geography of the vanished seas fade behind us and stand now in the center of the open tundra, the first truth that settles upon you is the shocking fragility of the human form. For underneath the furs and the leathers, we are still, at our core, tropical creatures, hairless and thin-skinned, designed to dissipate heat in the African sun, not to hoard it against the crushing weight of a polar winter. To stand here without protection is to understand the absolute indifference of the universe, for the cold is not an active malice that seeks to hurt you, but simply a vacuum, a relentless, silent demand for equilibrium that will pull the warmth from your blood as easily as a stone sinks in water. The temperature sits at 30 degrees below zero, a number that feels abstract until you feel the moisture in your nostrils turning to ice the moment it touches the air, creating a tiny, rhythmic crackling sound with every breath you take. It is a dry, sterile cold, devoid of the damp chill that seeps into bones in softer climates. But this dryness is deceptive, for it sucks the hydration from the body just as surely as the desert sun, leaving the lips cracked and the throat parched in a world made entirely of frozen water. There is a specific quality to the silence here that is unlike anything in the modern world. A silence so deep and heavy it feels like a pressure on the eardrums, amplified by the density of the cold air which carries sound with startling clarity. The snap of a twig can be heard for a mile, and the distant call of a raven sounds as if it is whispering directly into your ear. In this quiet, you become acutely aware of your own internal machinery, the thumping of the heart, which must work double time to pump warm blood to the extremities, the subtle shivering of muscles firing involuntarily to generate heat, the furnace of the metabolism burning through caloric reserves at a terrifying rate just to maintain the core temperature at that precarious magical number of 37 degrees Celsius. It is a biological tightrope walk performed over a chasm of ice, and the penalty for a misstep is a slow drifting sleep from which there is no waking. The light here plays tricks on the eyes, filtered through a suspended mist of ice crystals known as diamond dust, which hangs in the still air like glittering glitter, refracting the low sun into phantom halos and sundogs, mock suns that stand like sentinels on either side of the true star, creating a sky that looks holy and strange, a cathedral ceiling painted with light. Yet, despite the beauty, there's an inherent tension in the landscape, a sense that the environment is waiting for a mistake, a dropped glove, a wet boot, a moment of carelessness that allows the frost to touch the skin. We watch a lone figure moving across this expanse, a tiny speck of dark fur against the blinding white. And we realize that their survival is not a matter of toughness or brute strength. Muscles cannot fight the cold, they can only freeze, but a matter of profound, disciplined awareness. They do not run, for sweating is dangerous, the moisture freezing in the layers of clothing and destroying their insulation. Instead, they move with a deliberate, measured pace, a rhythm that balances the generation of body heat with the conservation of energy. They know the wind like a sailor knows the sea, reading the patterns in the snowdrifts to predict the gusts, keeping to the low ground, turning a shoulder to the gale, never fighting the air but slipping through it. It seems miraculous that we are here at all, that this soft, vulnerable primate has managed to colonize the edge of the inhabitable world. And perhaps that is the true mystery of the Ice Age. Not how the animals survived, for they were built for it, evolving heavy coats and specialized metabolisms over millions of years, but how we survived. We who have no fur, no blubber, no claws. We survived because we refused to accept the limitations of our biology, because we looked at the wolf and the bear and decided that if we could not grow their skins, we would borrow them, taking the protection of the animal world and wrapping it around our own fragile bodies. But before the needle and the thread, there's the feeling of the skin itself, the raw sensory experience of the prehistoric winter that defines the boundaries of human life. You can feel the cold creeping in at the edges, searching for a gap, a weakness, a place where the seal is imperfect, and it brings with it a strange, seductive drowsiness, a whispering invitation to simply sit down, to rest for a moment in the lee of a rock, to close your eyes against the glare. This is the siren song of hypothermia, the ghost in the wind that has claimed the unwary for thousands of years, and resisting it requires a mental fortitude as strong as any physical tool. The people of this time carry a map of warmth in their minds, a precise knowledge of how far they can travel before the cold winds, where the next shelter lies, how much fuel they carry in their packs. They are masters of their own physiology, sensing the drop in core temperature long before it becomes critical, adjusting their pace, changing their layers, eating a handful of dried fat to stoke the internal fire. To be alive here is to be in a constant, intimate dialogue with the elements, a conversation where the wind asks a question and the body must answer, moment by moment, breath by breath. The shadows lengthen across the snow, turning from blue to deep violet, and the temperature begins to drop further as the insulating blanket of the sun is pulled away and the world tightens, the ice contracting with sharp, resonant pings that echo across the valley. It is a formidable, majestic, and terrifying reality, this ocean of air that seeks to turn all water to stone. And yet, as we watch the figure pause and look up at the first emerging stars, we see not fear, but a calm, focused determination. They are not battling the wind. They are living within it, respecting its power, moving through the vast frozen breath of the world with the quiet confidence of those who know that, while the cold is strong, the spark of human ingenuity is, against all odds, just a little bit warmer. A tiny, persistent flame that refuses to be blown out by the gale. If the wind is the relentless question asked by the ice, then the answer lies not in the heavy stone of the spear point, nor in the brute strength of the muscle, but in something far smaller, a sliver of technology so delicate it could be lost in a handful of snow, yet so powerful it allowed our species to conquer the frozen world. We move now from the vast howling open of the tundra into the small, focused circle of firelight where a pair of hands is working, holding a tiny splinter of bird bone or mammoth ivory, polished to a gleam by hours of rubbing against leather. This is the eyed needle, perhaps the single most important invention of the Upper Paleolithic, a tool that seems humble to our modern eyes, but which represents a cognitive leap of staggering proportions. Before this, hides were likely draped or tied, heavy blankets that allowed the cold air to pump in and out with every movement, a fatal flaw when the temperature drops to 40 below. But with the invention of the eye, that tiny drilled hole that allows a thread of sinew to be pulled through the material rather than pushed, humans gained the ability to create complex, fitted forms, to turn the skin of the animal into a second skin for the human. Watch the hands as they work, moving with a rhythmic, practiced patience, pushing the sharp awl through the tough reindeer hide to create a path, then slipping the needle through, pulling the sinew tight with a soft, sliding sound that is the heartbeat of Ice Age survival. This is not crude improvisation. It is engineering of the highest order, following the same principles of thermodynamics that drive the design of modern mountaineering gear, a sophisticated understanding of moisture, insulation, and airflow that was bought with centuries of trial and error. The clothing being made here is a multi-layered system, a complex suit of survival that would rival anything found in an expedition store today. Against the skin, the inner layer is made from the softest furs, perhaps the belly fur of a hare or the skin of a fawn, turned inward so the fur touches the human body, trapping a layer of warm air directly against the skin while wicking away the moisture of sweat, which is the true killer in the north. Over this goes the middle layer, the insulation, heavy tunics of reindeer or bison hide that trap the body's heat and hold it close, creating a microclimate that travels with the hunter. And finally, the outer shell, the windbreaker, a tightly stitched waterproof garment often made from intestines or treated skins that sheds the snow and blocks the biting gale, sealed at the wrists and ankles to prevent the precious warmth from escaping. To create a single suit like this requires not days, but weeks of labor, a staggering investment of time that tells us something profound about these people. They were not living hand to mouth in a state of constant panic. They had surplus time, they had the luxury of preparation, and they had a culture that valued the slow, meditative work of creation. We can smell the materials as we drift closer, the sharp, acrid tang of urine used to cure the leather, making it soft and pliable, the rich, smoky scent of the brain-tanning process, and the lingering odor of wood smoke that permeates every fiber. The thread itself is a marvel, split from the long, tough tendons of the reindeer leg, chewed by the women and men for hours to soften the fibers before they can be twisted into a cord that is stronger than cotton and rot-resistant, a thread that will swell when wet to seal the needle holes and keep the water out. It seems that the survival of the group depended as much on the seamstress as the hunter, for a broken seam on the step could mean frostbite and death just as surely as a broken leg. There is a tenderness in this work, a realization that every stitch is an act of care, a physical manifestation of love and protection. When a mother sews a hood for her child, framing the small face in wolverine fur, which does not hold frost from the breath, she is using her knowledge of the animal world to shield the life she has brought into it. We see the decorative elements too, for these were not purely utilitarian gray sacks. Archaeology shows us beads carved from mammoth ivory, shells traded from distant shores, and intricate patterns of dyed quills stitched into the seams. Even in the face of the apocalypse, humans felt the need to be beautiful, to mark their identity on their chests, to say, "I am here, and I'm not just an animal trying to stay warm. I am a person of this tribe." The needle allowed for the invention of the hood, the mitten, and the boot, complex shapes that require three-dimensional thinking to flatten onto a two-dimensional hide and then reassemble. Imagine the silence of the workspace, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft ch-ch of the needle passing through the leather, a sound that has been repeated billions of times over 20,000 years. It is a hypnotic, meditative rhythm, a trance state where the mind can wander while the hands perform their ancient knowledge. We often speak of the caveman as a brute wrapped in a rough loincloth, But the reality is, a figure dressed in tailored, fringed, and beaded couture, a walking display of technological mastery that allowed them to inhabit latitudes that should have killed them. Without this technology, the colonization of the Americas would have been impossible. The Bridge of Beringia would have been a frozen tomb rather than a highway. It was the needle that allowed us to carry the tropical climate of our African ancestors with us into the heart of the ice, creating a portable summer that we wore on our backs. As the garment nears completion, we see the maker inspect the seams, testing the tension, looking for gaps, their face illuminated by the low light, etched with the lines of concentration. There is a deep satisfaction in the work, the feeling of closing the final stitch and knowing that this object will stand between a loved one and the indifference of the winter wind. It is a barrier of intimacy, a shell made of death that preserves life. The wind outside may howl, dropping the temperature to a point where trees explode and stones crack, but inside the suit, inside the layers of trapped air and soft fur, the human body remains at a steady 37 degrees, a tropical island navigating a white ocean. We drift away from the firelight, watching the figure hold up the finished parka, examining it with a critical eye, and we realize that we are looking at one of the first true machines of humanity, not a machine of gears and metal, but a machine of skin and sinew, engineered to defeat the climate itself. The needle is small, a tiny fragility of bone that can snap in an instant, but in its eye, we see the vision of the future, the ability to reshape the world to fit our needs, to take the raw materials of nature and stitch them into a shield that allows us to walk where we do not belong, safe, warm, and defiantly alive in the center of the deep freeze. Now we step back from the intimate work of the needle to witness the grander scale of human ambition, moving across the open plains of what is now Ukraine and Russia, where the wind sweeps uninterrupted for thousands of miles, a landscape so void of trees that it feels like the surface of the moon. And here, in this vast emptiness, we encounter a silhouette that defies explanation, a structure rising from the snow that looks at first like a natural hillock or a trick of the mist. But as we draw closer, the shape resolves into something constructed, something deliberate and shockingly massive. This is the Mammoth Bone House, the first true architecture of the North, a dwelling that challenges every primitive stereotype we hold, for this is not a crude tent hastily thrown together by wandering nomads, but a fortress of engineering, a permanent residence weighing over 20 tons, built to stand for generations against the crushing weight of the Ice Age winter. It sits low to the ground, a domed hemisphere that mimics the shape of the igloo or the yurt, aerodynamic forms that let the gale slip over them without finding a purchase. But the materials here are not ice or felt, but the heavy bleached skeleton of the megafauna itself. Stand at the entrance for a moment and look at the foundation, and you will see the genius of the design. The base is a ring of interlocking mammoth skulls, their chins dug deep into the permafrost, arranged in precise geometric circles that provide a footing as stable as concrete. Above them rise walls made of stacked mandibles and long bones, woven together in a herringbone pattern that is both structurally sound and strangely beautiful, a masonry of calcium and memory that gleams white in the moonlight. To build a single house like this required the remains of over 60 mammoths, a quantity of bone that suggests these people were not just hunting, but harvesting the landscape, gathering the skeletal legacy of the herds that had died naturally or been hunted over decades, treating the bones not as waste, but as the only available timber in a treeless world. It would have taken months, perhaps years, to collect, sort, and assemble these pieces, a communal effort of labor and logistics that implies a complex society capable of long-term planning. We step through the entrance, passing under a majestic arch formed by two curving tusks meeting overhead, a literal doorway through the mouth of the beast. And as the heavy hide flap drops behind us, the howling wind is instantly cut off, replaced by a sudden wrapping silence that feels heavy and safe. The difference in temperature is shocking. Outside, it is a lethal 30 degrees below zero, but inside, trapped by the thermal mass of the thick bone walls and the insulating layers of turf and sod packed against the exterior, the air is warm, hovering comfortably above freezing even before the hearth is lit. The interior is spacious, far larger than you might expect, with room for 20 or 30 people to sleep, work, and live. The floor dug down below the surface of the earth to take advantage of the ground's stability. Look up at the ceiling and you see the roof structure, a masterpiece of tension and balance where massive tusks are used as arched rafters, supporting a roof of stitched hides, sewn with those same delicate needles we just watched, weighted down by reindeer antlers to keep the skins tight against the wind. It does not feel macabre to be inside a room made of bones. It feels elemental, like being inside the belly of a great protective animal that has swallowed the tribe to keep it safe. The fire in the center casts long, dancing shadows against the walls, animating the textured surface of the mandibles so that the house itself seems to breathe, the bones glowing with a soft amber warmth that belies their cold origins. The acoustics here are unique, the rough, porous surfaces of the bone absorbing the echoes, making voices sound close and intimate, a stark contrast to the echoing acoustic of a stone cave. This is a space designed for storytelling, for the murmuring of mothers to infants, for the low rhythmic chanting of the elders. We see the details of daily life scattered around the perimeter, furs piled high for bedding on raised earthen platforms, drying racks suspended near the smoke hole, pits dug into the permafrost to act as natural freezers for storing meat. It is a home in the truest sense of the word, a place of permanence where a child could grow up and point to a specific bone in the wall and say, "My grandfather placed that there." Scientists still debate whether these houses were occupied year-round or used as seasonal aggregations, but the sheer effort of their construction speaks of a deep attachment to place, a refusal to be merely transient passengers on the land. In some of these dwellings, we find evidence of aesthetics that go beyond function, bones painted with red ochre, skulls arranged in symmetrical patterns that serve no structural purpose but simply please the eye, suggesting that these people found beauty in the materials of their survival. They did not just endure the landscape, they built their identity out of it. The smell inside is a complex mix of wood smoke, curing leather, dry earth, and the faint sweet musk of old bone, a scent that spells safety to the people who live here. As the fire crackles, fed perhaps by the spongy, marrow-rich interior of a mammoth bone itself, we realize that the animal provides everything. The food in the belly, the clothes on the back, the fuel in the hearth, and the walls that hold back the night. It is a total integration of life and death, a cycle where the end of the mammoth allows for the continuation of the human. We sit by the fire, watching the smoke drift up toward the small opening in the roof where a single star is visible, and we feel the immense solidity of the structure, a fortress of white stone that stands as a testament to human stubbornness. They looked at a frozen, empty plain where nothing stood higher than a blade of grass, and they imagined a castle. They dragged the weight of giants across the snow, solved the physics of the arch and the dome without a written language, and created a warm, luminous bubble of life in the midst of the most hostile environment on Earth. The wind buffets the outside of the shell, a dull thudding sound that feels miles away, and inside, the tribe sleeps, held in the cradle of the ribs, protected by the strength of the monsters they once feared, safe in a house that is literally built from the history of the land itself. It is a profound, quiet victory, a realization that home is not something you find, but something you make, piece by heavy piece against the odds, standing firm while the Ice Age blusters and rages in vain against the walls of the sanctuary. Move your gaze now from the white skeletal ribs of the walls down to the center of the floor, to the glowing, pulsating heart of the dwelling. For the house is only a shell, a passive container, but the hearth is the active engine that keeps the cold at bay, a sacred circle of chemistry that separates life from death in the deep winter. Here, in the treeless expanse of the mammoth steppe, the very nature of fire has had to change, evolving from the roaring, crackling wood bonfires of our forest-dwelling ancestors into something far more complex, disciplined, and precious. There is no wood here, save for the stunted dwarf willow scrub that clings to the riverbanks or the occasional piece of driftwood carried down from the distant south. So the fire you see before you is not orange and yellow, leaping wildly into the air, but a low, intense bed of coals that burns with a strange, ghostly blue and white flame. They are burning bone, a fuel source that seems counterintuitive to us, for we think of bone as stone-like and inert, yet fresh bone, rich with fatty marrow and collagen, is a potent reservoir of solar energy stored in the animal's frame. To burn, it requires a mastery of thermal dynamics that borders on art, for bone is stubborn. It will not catch a spark like dry leaves. It demands a high initial heat to unlock its potential, requiring a starter fire of precious kindling or dried dung to reach the critical temperature where the fat begins to render and the structure ignites. Watch the firekeeper, likely an elder whose mobility has lessened but whose knowledge has deepened, as they tend this difficult flame with the focus of a jeweler, placing the spongy, porous vertebrae of the mammoth into the center of the heat, knowing exactly how to stack them to encourage the draft. For a bonfire, smothered is a fire lost. When it catches, it does not pop with the resinous snap of pine. It hisses softly, a sound like grease hitting a hot pan, as the marrow liquefies and vaporizes, feeding a flame that is incredibly hot and long-lasting, burning for hours without needing replenishment. The smell is distinct, not the sharp, acrid bite of wood smoke that waters the eyes, but a heavier, oilier scent, thick and savory, a smell that clings to the furs and the hair, the olfactory signature of the Ice Age home. But the fire is not just for warmth, it is a tool of precision, and as we look around the hearth, we see the evidence of an energy economy that wastes nothing. Beside the fire pit lies a pile of smooth, round stones, river cobbles that have been selected for their density and resistance to cracking. These are not idle decorations, they are thermal batteries. We watch as the firekeeper uses a pair of long, modified antler tongs to pluck a glowing stone from the heart of the coals, brushing off the ash before dropping it with a sharp hiss into a leather bag lined with a waterproof stomach punch and filled with water and crushed roots. This is the technology of the pot boiler, a method of cooking that requires no heavy metal cauldron and wastes no heat, transferring the thermal energy directly into the fluid with near-perfect efficiency. The water boils violently within seconds, cooking the stew from the inside out, a gentle simmering heat that breaks down the tough fibers of the wild tubers and releases the nutrients of the meat without scorching it. It is a quiet, domestic magic, the ability to boil water in a skin bag without burning the leather, a trick of physics that allows these people to extract the maximum caloric value from their food, fueling the furnace of their bodies against the chill. And when the cooking is done, the fire is not allowed to burn down to ash. It is banked, covered with a layer of insulating turf or ash to restrict the oxygen, turning it into a slow-release radiator that keeps the temperature of the hut stable through the long hours of the night. In some of the larger dwellings, we even see evidence of channels dug into the floor, primitive ductwork that draws fresh air from the outside, warming it as it passes under the hearth before releasing it into the room, a ventilation system that prevents the buildup of carbon monoxide while maintaining the pressure that keeps drafts out. But the fire in the central hearth is not the only light in this world. Look to the corners of the dwelling where the shadows gather, and you will see small flickering stars, soft points of light that can be carried in the palm of a hand. These are fat lamps, simple yet revolutionary devices carved from soft soapstone or molded from clay, shallow dishes filled with rendered animal fat, seal oil near the coast, mammoth tallow here on the plains, with a wick of twisted moss or dried fungus floating in the center. They burn with a steady, smokeless flame, a clean light that does not waver, allowing the people to reclaim the night. Before the lamp, the setting sun meant the end of productivity, a plunge into 12 or 16 hours of blindness. But with this portable sun, the day is extended at will. We see a woman using a lamp to illuminate the delicate work of her sewing, the light casting a warm, golden pool over her hands. We see a man carrying one to the back of the cave to inspect a cache of tools, the shadows retreating before him. The lamp changed the human relationship with time, creating a fourth shift of labor, storytelling, and socialization that happened after the world had gone to sleep. It is a technology of intimacy, creating small, private spheres of light within the larger darkness, allowing for conversations that are whispered and personal. The discipline required to maintain these fires, both the great hearth and the small lamps, is the discipline of survival itself. For in a land without trees, fuel is as precious as food. Every bone burned is a bone that had to be hauled from a kill site miles away. Every scoop of fat in the lamp is calories that could have been eaten. The calculation is constant and unconscious. Is this light worth the hunger? Is this warmth worth the labor? And yet, they burn them, because the fire provides something more than just heat. It provides a focal point for the mind, a mesmerizing, shifting landscape of light that calms the nervous system and binds the group together. To sit around the fire is to be part of the circle, to be included in the shared warmth of the tribe. We watch the faces illuminated by the bonfire, the high cheekbones and deep-set eyes washing in and out of the blue-white glow. And we see a profound relaxation, a letting go of the tension of the tundra. Here, in the thermal envelope of the hearth, the muscles loosen, the guard comes down, and the stories begin to flow. The fire is a living presence in the house, a guest that must be fed and respected, a capricious spirit that can bite if treated poorly, but which offers life if treated with care. Scientists still debate exactly when humans fully mastered the art of making fire at will, striking flint against pyrite to create the spark, rather than just preserving it from natural sources. But looking at the sophistication of this hearth, the answer seems clear. These are not people who wait for lightning. These are pyrotechnic engineers who carry the potential for fire in their pouches, who understand the chemistry of combustion better than most modern humans. As the night deepens and the wind outside rises to a shriek, the firekeeper adds one last large, dense hip bone to the coals, banking it carefully to ensure it will smolder until dawn, and the glow settles into a deep, steady crimson, a rhythmic pulsing that matches the breathing of the sleepers. The heat radiates outward, absorbed by the thermal mass of the bone walls, so that the house itself seems to hold the warmth of the animal it once was, wrapping the humans in a cocoon of safety that defies the freezing void just a few feet away. But the fire does not only consume, it transforms. And if you look closely at the food being prepared on those heated stones, you will notice something that disrupts the popular image of the Ice Age diet. For while the smell of roasting venison and mammoth fat is heavy in the air, there's another scent weaving through it, earthy and sweet, the smell of roasted roots and ground seeds. For decades, we've imagined these ancestors as pure carnivores, blood-soaked hunters living solely on the flesh of the megafauna, driven by a desperate, insatiable hunger for protein. But the truth, hidden for thousands of years in the most intimate of places, tells a different, greener story. We must drift inward now, zooming in from the wide plains to the microscopic landscape of the human mouth, specifically to the teeth of a skull resting in the silence of the earth, where the fossilized plaque, the dental calculus, has preserved a tiny biological time capsule of what was actually eaten. Trapped within this calcified matrix are the ghosts of plants, microscopic starch grains, phytoliths, and plant fibers that have survived the millennia to whisper the truth that these people were not just hunters, but master botanists. The mammoth steppe was not merely a pasture for animals, it was a hidden garden, a landscape where the wealth lay buried beneath the soil, safe from the frost. We watch a group of women and children moving across the hillside in the pale morning light, carrying not spears but weighted digging sticks, their eyes scanning the ground with the same predatory focus as the wolf, but searching for a different kind of prey. They know that the beastort, the silverweed, and the cattail hold their energy in their roots during the long winter, storing massive reserves of carbohydrates underground to survive the cold, just as the humans do in their bone houses. To find these tubers requires a mental encyclopedia of foliage, a memory of where the flowers bloomed in the short summer, for now the stalks are dead and withered, invisible to the untrained eye. Watch them kneel on the cold ground, breaking the crust of the frost to pry out the prize, the gnarled, muddy rhizomes that look like stones but feel heavy with life. This is the underground forest of the tundra, a reliable, stationary food source that does not run away, does not fight back, and does not migrate. But the genius of the Ice Age human lies not just in the gathering, but in the processing. For many of these plants are tough, fibrous, or even toxic in their raw state. We drift back to the hearth to see the technology of the kitchen, which is as advanced in its own way as the flint knapping of the spear point. We see wide, flat stones, worn smooth in the center by years of friction, the first grinding stones of history. Listen to the rhythmic shh of the handstone moving back and forth, crushing the dried roots and seeds into a fine white flour. This is a revolutionary sound, the sound of energy being unlocked. For by grinding and cooking these plant tissues, humans are breaking down the cellular walls, gelatinizing the starches, and making the calories vastly more accessible to the body. It is a form of pre-digestion, a chemical hack that allows the human gut to extract nearly all the energy from the food, fueling the massive glucose-hungry brain that demands 20% of the body's energy just to think. They are making flatbreads, mixing the flour with water and fat to cook on the hot rocks, creating a dense portable energy bar that can be carried on long treks. This is not starvation food, it is a calculated nutritional strategy. The diet is broad and varied, including berries preserved in fat, pine nuts rich in oil, wild peas, and nettles. We see the children chewing on the sweet resin of the birch, a prehistoric chewing gum that cleans the teeth and has mild antiseptic properties. And this botanical knowledge extends far beyond mere calories. It reaches into the realm of medicine. We watch an older woman, the keeper of the green knowledge, peeling the bark from a willow branch, her hands moving with the confidence of a pharmacist. She knows that the bitter inner bark contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin, and she brews it into a tea to soothe the aching joints of the hunters or to break the fever of a child. She gathers yarrow to pack into wounds to stop the bleeding and chamomile to calm the stomach, drawing on a pharmacopoeia that has been tested and refined over thousands of years of trial and error. This is not superstition, it is biochemistry observed through the lens of deep time. The presence of these plants in the archaeological record, often found with the dead or in the plaque of the living, suggests that the concept of health care is as old as humanity itself. We realize that to survive here, one must be a generalist, a creature that can pivot instantly from the hunt to the harvest, exploiting every niche the ecosystem offers. If the mammoth herds fail to appear, or if the hunt is unsuccessful, the tribe does not starve because they have the roots, the seeds, and the stored reserves of the summer. This stability, provided largely by the gathering labor of women and children, is the invisible backbone of the society, the safety net that allows the high-risk, high-reward gamble of the mammoth hunt to take place at all. The atmosphere in this kitchen area of the camp is different from the high-tension focus of the hunt. It is social, repetitive, and communal. We hear the cracking of hazelnuts, the rustle of dried herbs being sorted, the soft laughter of people working with their hands in a rhythm that requires skill but not silence. It is a reminder that the Ice Age was not a grim, gray march of suffering, but a world of flavors and smells, of seasoned stews and sweet berries, of warm tea drunk from a wooden cup while the storm rages outside. The image of the caveman changes in our minds, shifting from a brute tearing at raw meat to a person who understands the subtle properties of 100 different plants, who knows how to leach the toxins from an acorn and how to grind a cattail root into flour. They are chemists of the landscape, transforming the raw, inedible materials of the steppe into the fuel of civilization. As the aroma of the cooking flatbread rises, mixing with the wood smoke, it triggers a primal memory in us, a recognition of the comfort of carbohydrates, the ancient reassurance of a warm meal that fills the belly and quiets the mind. We see the satisfaction on their faces as they eat, not wolfing down their food in fear, but sharing it, passing the food from hand to hand, the plant-based portion of the meal balancing the heavy proteins of the meat. It is a sophisticated, omnivorous diet that supported a body just as capable, just as tall, and arguably healthier than the average modern human. The dental plaque tells us they had little tooth decay, for they had no refined sugar, only the complex, slow-burning energy of the wild earth. As the meal concludes and the tools are wiped clean, the grinding stone carefully covered, the digging sticks placed by the door, we understand that the survival of our species was not won solely by the sharp edge of the spear, but by the dull edge of the digging stick and the rough surface of the grinding stone. It was the ability to see the hidden potential in a withered stalk, to know that beneath the frozen mud lay life, waiting to be found. The hidden garden of the steppe was vast and generous to those who knew its secrets, and as the snow begins to fall again, covering the tracks of the gatherers, we know that the knowledge is safe, stored in the minds of the elders and the habits of the tribe, a green thread of survival weaving through the white tapestry of the ice. We leave the dry, static silence of the interior now, letting the wind carry us westward until the golden grass fades into gray dunes and the smell of dust is replaced by the sharp metallic tang of iodine and brine, for we have reached the edge of the habitable world, the restless, heaving boundary where the water ends. Here, along the rocky, fog-shrouded coastlines of what will one day be Spain, France, and South Africa, the rhythm of life is not dictated by the silent fall of snow, but by the crashing, rhythmic pulse of the tides, a heartbeat that has never stopped since the oceans were born. To stand here is to feel a different kind of cold, a damp, penetrating chill that clings to the skin like a wet hand, born of the sea spray and the heavy, moisture-laden fog that rolls off the Atlantic. The ocean itself looks different than the one we know, grayer, perhaps, and teeming with a terrifying abundance of life, unpressured by industrial fleets, a wild, chaotic soup of predators and prey that stretches to the horizon. For a long time, we believed that the people of the Ice Age turned their backs on this gray expanse, that they were creatures of the land who feared the water, but the chemical ghosts trapped within their very bones tell a startlingly different story. If we were to look at the isotopes of nitrogen and carbon preserved in the skeletons of these coastal populations, we would find a signal that looks less like a wolf and more like an otter. In some regions, up to half of the protein they consumed came not from the mammoth or the deer, but from the sea. They were not just terrestrial hunters, they were people of the tide, expert fishermen who understood that while the herds on the land might migrate or starve in a bad winter, the sea always provides. Watch them now, moving carefully over the slick black rocks at low tide, their silhouettes vanishing and reappearing in the mist. They are gathering shellfish, limpets, mussels, and periwinkles, prying them from the stones with bone chisels, a harvest that requires no weapon, only patience and the knowledge of the lunar cycle. It is a reliable daily intake of protein and minerals that supports the brain and creates a buffer against famine. But they are not just scavengers, they are engineers of the water. Look closely at the hands of the figure standing knee-deep in the freezing surf, and you will see they are holding a line made of twisted kelp or sinew, at the end of which hangs a hook carved from bone. These are not the crude, jagged gorges of earlier times, but sophisticated curved hooks, carefully shaped to snag the lip of a cod or a haddock, weighted with grooved stones to sink them to the bottom where the heavy fish lie. This is a profound shift in psychology. The hunter on the plain sees his prey and throws the spear, a direct line of sight, but the fisherman casts his line into the invisible dark, trusting in his knowledge of the unseen world beneath the waves. It is an act of faith and calculation, but the greatest bounty comes not from the open sea, but from the rivers that feed it. We drift upstream to the estuary, where the fresh water meets the salt, and we witness a phenomenon that brings the entire tribe to the water's edge, the seasonal run of the salmon. The water here seems to boil, churning with the silver backs of thousands of fish fighting their way upstream to spawn, a living river of muscle and fat that arrives with the predictability of the solstice. The scene is one of controlled chaos and immense industry. Men and women stand on the banks or on wooden weirs built into the shallows, fences of woven hazel meant to funnel the fish into narrow channels, striking downward with lysters, three-pronged spears designed to grip the slippery scales. They are pulling wealth from the water, fish after fish, huge specimens weighing 20 or 30 pounds, their flesh rich with the marine oils that are essential for survival in the cold. This is the harvest of the Silver River, a caloric windfall that rivals the mammoth hunt but carries far less risk. The air is filled with the cries of gulls and the splash of water, a soundscape of abundance. On the banks, the catch is processed immediately, split open with flint knives and hung on racks to be smoked or dried, transforming the perishable fish into a stable winter reserve. This ability to store marine protein meant that coastal populations could stay in one place for longer, building more permanent settlements, their lives anchored by the reliable rhythms of the sea. We also see evidence of grander ambitions, perhaps a skin boat, a coracle made of hides stretched over a wooden frame, bobbing in the sheltered cove. It is a fragile vessel, yet it allows them to leave the land, to paddle out to the near islands or to hunt the seals that bask on the offshore rocks. The seal is a prize of immense value, not just for its meat but for its blubber, the high-energy fuel that burns in the fat lamps we saw earlier. To hunt a seal in the water is a contest of stealth and speed, requiring a harpoon with a detachable head, a piece of technology that ensures the weapon stays in the animal while the shaft floats free, allowing the hunter to retrieve the catch. And occasionally, the sea offers a gift that requires no hunting at all. We might drift further down the beach to see the massive dark shape of a beached whale, a mountain of flesh stranded by the tide. In the modern world, this is a tragedy. In the Ice Age, it is a miracle. The entire band, perhaps neighboring bands too, would gather to harvest this leviathan, a single event that could sustain them for months. They work with a festive urgency, stripping the blubber, carving the meat, and harvesting the precious ivory of the teeth and the heavy ribs for construction. The whale is a gift from the deep, a reminder that the ocean is a vast circulating system of energy that occasionally washes up on the shore of the human world. The atmosphere here at the water's edge is one of resilience and adaptability. The wind is relentless, stinging the eyes, and the salt spray crusts the hair, but the people seem at home in this gray transition zone. They wear parkas made of seal skin, which sheds water better than reindeer hide, and their boots are treated with oil to keep the damp out. They watch the waves with a gaze that is different from the hunter of the plains. It is a gaze that understands tides, currents, and the shifting moods of the water. The sea is a demanding mistress, dangerous and cold, but she is also generous, a constant provider in a world where the land can freeze into sterility. As the sun begins to set over the ocean, painting the water in bruised purples and blacks, the tide begins to turn, the water rushing back out to the deep with a sound like a great, receding breath. We realize that for these people, the edge of the world was not a barrier, but a frontier, a place where the skills of observation and patience yielded a harvest that allowed them to thrive. They were the first mariners, the first to understand that the blue planet offered as much life as the green one. The firelight flickers on the wet rocks, reflecting in the dark pools left by the tide, and the smell of roasting fish mingles with the salt air. A sensory memory of a time when humanity stood on the precipice of the ocean and decided not to turn back, but to cast a net into the unknown and pull survival from the depths. The wind outside the shelter has risen to a shriek, a physical force that batters against the walls of the bonehouse or the cave entrance, trying to tear away the layers of protection that separate the living from the frozen void. But here, inside the circle of firelight, the storm feels miles away, reduced to a dull, rhythmic thrumming that only serves to deepen the sense of safety. We have spoken of the tools of stone and bone, the mastery of fire, and the harvest of the sea. But now we must look at the most powerful survival technology of all, the one that is invisible, weightless, and yet stronger than any mammoth tusk, the social technology of the band. Look around the circle now, at the 25 or 30 faces illuminated by the dancing flames, and realize that this number is not accidental. It is the mathematical sweet spot of human cooperation, large enough to provide genetic diversity and a variety of skills, but small enough that every single person is intimately known, their strengths, weaknesses, and temperament mapped by the group since birth. There are no strangers here. In a world where a broken leg or a failed hunt could mean extinction, trust is not a luxury. It is the currency of survival. The structure of this society is radically different from the hierarchies we know today. There are no kings here, no chiefs barking orders from a throne. Leadership is fluid, situational, a mantle that passes from hand to hand, depending on the need of the moment. When the mammoth herd is spotted, the best tracker leads. When the sickness comes, the healer leads. When the social friction rises, the diplomat leads. It is a meritocracy of competence where authority is granted by respect, not seized by force. We watch them as they interact, the subtle body language, the shared glances, the soft murmuring of voices, and we see a profound egalitarianism at work. The food that is brought in, whether a massive bison or a basket of roots, is not hoarded by the hunter who killed it. It is shared, divided meticulously among every member of the band, from the strongest spear thrower to the toothless elder. This is not charity. It is insurance. The hunter knows that next week his luck may fail or he may be injured, and his survival will depend on the generosity of others. This demand sharing creates a safety net of obligation and gratitude that binds the group together tighter than blood. We see it in the way they handle conflict, which is inevitable in such close quarters. There are no police, no judges, so the peace is kept through social pressure, through teasing, humor, and the terrifying threat of ostracization. To be cast out of the band is a death sentence, and everyone knows it, so the social glue is maintained with obsessive care. But the true heart of this social technology is revealed when we look at the vulnerable. In the corner, resting on a pile of soft furs, is a man whose arm is withered, perhaps from an injury years ago, or a woman born with a twisted spine. In a purely survival of the fittest narrative, these individuals should have been left behind to die, dragged down by the brutal math of the ice. Yet, the archaeological record shows us the opposite: skeletons of the severely disabled, the injured, and the infirm who lived for years, decades even, supported by their community. We see the healed fractures of femurs that would have required months of immobility and care. We see individuals with congenital disorders who were clearly fed and protected. This tells us something profound about our ancestors. They did not just value utility, they valued the person. They understood that a human being is more than a calorie-gathering machine, that the storyteller with the broken leg, the artist with the twisted back, or the elder with the failing eyes contributed something essential to the soul of the tribe. This care extends deeply into the realm of childhood. The children here are not treated as miniature adults to be disciplined and broken, but as precious autonomous beings indulged and protected with a fierce tenderness. We see them playing in the shadows, mimicking the hunt with tiny spears, or curling up in the laps of the adults, absorbed into the collective warmth of the group. The raising of a child is the responsibility of everyone. A toddler is watched by 10 pairs of eyes, fed by 5 different hands. This allo-parenting frees up the biological parents for work and ensures that the child bonds with the entire group, weaving them into the social fabric from their first breath. It is a world without privacy as we know it, a world of constant, intense intimacy where you sleep, eat, and breathe alongside your kin, where your heartbeat eventually synchronizes with theirs. This proximity could be suffocating, yet here it feels like a shield. Against the vast, indifferent scale of the Ice Age landscape, the individual is nothing, a speck of dust to be blown away, but the band is an organism, a multi-headed creature that sees in all directions, remembers all dangers, and can solve problems that would baffle a solitary mind. The firelight catches the eyes of a young woman laughing at a joke whispered by her brother, and for a second, the thousands of years between us vanish. We recognize that laugh, that look of comfortable affection. It is the same social machinery that still hums in our own brains, the deep, desperate need to belong, to be seen, to be held within the circle. We survived the ice not because we were the strongest animals, but because we were the friendliest, the ones who could suppress our aggression and work together, who could extend the circle of empathy to include the weak and the old. The darkness presses in, infinite and cold, but inside the ring of faces there is warmth, there is laughter, and there is the unspoken promise that as long as the fire burns, no one faces the night alone. The wind may howl, but the band holds firm, a knot of humanity tied tight against the unraveling of the world. In the center of this web of connection, sitting closest to the warmth of the hearth, we find a figure who represents perhaps the single greatest evolutionary advantage our species possesses. Yet she is often overlooked in the stories of spears and hunts. Look closely at the woman with the silver hair, her face etched with the deep, intricate map of 60 or 70 winters, her hands gnarled like old oak roots, but moving with a dexterity that belies their age. She is the grandmother, the elder, the living library of the tribe, and her presence here is a biological anomaly that sets humanity apart from almost every other creature on Earth. In the animal kingdom, most lives end when reproduction ceases. When the body can no longer bear young, it fades and dies, for nature is usually ruthless in its efficiency. But humans are different. We evolved to live for decades after our reproductive years were over, a unique third act of life that scientists believe was selected for one specific vital reason: the transfer of information. In a world without writing, without books or hard drives, the death of an elder is not just a personal loss, it is the burning of a library, the erasure of an encyclopedia that took a lifetime to write. This woman is not a burden to the group. She is their insurance policy against the apocalypse. The young hunters, strong as they are, know only the weather of the last 20 years. They know the migration patterns they have seen with their own eyes. But the climate of the Ice Age is chaotic, prone to sudden violent shifts, the flickering switch of the climate system, and when the great drought comes, or the caribou herd inexplicably changes its route for the first time in a generation, the young are lost. It is then that they turn to her. She remembers. She remembers the famine of 40 years ago, the one that killed half the tribe, and she remembers where they went to survive it, the hidden valley where the water never freezes, the fallback food source that no one has eaten in decades but which will keep them alive now. Her mind holds the long data, the deep patterns of the world that only reveal themselves over the span of a human lifetime. We watch her now, her voice low and raspy, weaving a story that the children listen to with wide, unblinking eyes. It sounds like a myth, a story of a great white bear that walks on two legs or a star that fell from the sky. But encoded within the narrative are precise instructions. Do not cross the ice when it sings this specific note. Avoid the liver of this animal in spring, for it is poison. Here is how you find your way back when the whiteout swallows the horizon. She is teaching them how to survive dangers they have not yet faced, downloading the software of survival into their developing brains. But her value is not just intellectual, it is physical and immediate. Watch how she takes the crying infant from the arms of the exhausted mother, settling the child into the practiced curve of her lap, soothing it with a rhythm that has comforted 3 generations. By taking on the burden of childcare, she frees the younger, fertile women to forage, to work, and to stay healthy, doubling the caloric intake of the family and ensuring that the children survive the perilous first years of life. This is the grandmother effect, a subtle force of love and labor that dramatically increased the survival rate of Homo sapiens, allowing us to expand our populations while our cousins, the Neanderthals, who may not have had as many of these older elders, slowly faded away. The toddler in her lap reaches up to touch her face, tracing the lines of her wrinkles, and there's a profound connection there, a loop of time closing upon itself, the very old holding the very new. She feeds the child a piece of pre-chewed meat, a gesture of intimacy that transfers not just nutrition, but the microbiome, the immune system of the ancestors passed down to the future. In her, the aggression of the world is tempered with patience. She has seen enough death to know that kindness is often more efficient than anger, and her mediation settles the squabbles that could tear the tight-knit band apart. She is the keeper of the genealogies, the one who knows exactly who is related to whom across the vast, scattered network of the steppe, ensuring that when the great gatherings happen, marriages are made that keep the bloodlines healthy. Without her, the social web would fray, the knowledge of the past would vanish, and every generation would have to learn how to survive from scratch, a dangerous reset that would leave them vulnerable to the ice. We see the respect the others pay her, not a stiff formal reverence, but a gentle, tactile care. They bring her the softest parts of the meat, they mend her furs, they make sure her sleeping place is furthest from the draft. They do this because they love her, yes, but also because they know that she is the pilot of their vessel, the only one who carries the map in her head. As she leans back against the mammoth bone pillar, her eyes closing in a half-doze, she looks frail, a small bundle of gray and brown against the shadows, but make no mistake, she is the strongest thing in the room. She has survived the childbed, the tiger, the starvation, and the freeze. She is a master of the Ice Age, a veteran of 1,000 winters. Her memory is the thread that stitches the timeline of the tribe together, connecting the ancestors who are gone to the children who are yet to be born. In the silence of the hut, her breathing is a steady, reassuring rhythm, a reminder that human life is long, that wisdom accumulates, and that even in the harshest environment on earth, there is a place for the slow, the quiet, and the old. The firelight gilds her silver hair, turning it into the halo of light, and for a moment, we can see the entirety of the human story reflected in her face, not a story of brute force, but of memory, care, and the enduring power of the grandmother to hold back the dark. But the fire in the bone house, warm and protective as it is not the only fire in the world. And if we were to lift our gaze from the intimate circle of the hearth and look out across the crushing darkness of the winter steppe, we might see, far on the distant horizon, a tiny flickering pinprick of orange light, a star that has fallen to earth and refuses to go out. It is another camp, another band, another family huddled against the cold, and while the physical distance between these groups might be measured in weeks of hard walking, the invisible distance is zero, for they are bound together by a web of kinship and necessity that is the true nervous system of the Ice Age. For a long time, we imagined these small bands of hunter-gatherers as isolated islands, lonely clusters of humanity drifting in a void, suspicious of strangers, and prone to violent conflict whenever they met. But the genetic map of our ancestors tells a story that is far more peaceful and far more complex. If these groups had truly been isolated, marrying only within their own small numbers, they would have succumbed to the genetic decay of inbreeding within a few centuries, their health collapsing as the gene pool stagnated. Yet the skeletons we find are robust and diverse, their DNA revealing a constant, vibrant flow of new blood from hundreds of miles away. This tells us that they did not fear the stranger. They sought the stranger. Imagine now the preparations for a journey, not a hunt for food, but a hunt for connection, undertaken perhaps by a young man and his uncles, or a small delegation of women, packing their sleds with dried meat and extra furs, checking the lacings of their boots with nervous anticipation. They are setting out into the white void, not to kill, but to visit, navigating by the shape of the hills in the map of stories given to them by the elders, tracing an invisible thread that links their fire to that distant glow on the horizon. They travel for days, enduring the wind and the silence, until finally the landscape changes, perhaps narrowing into a river valley or opening onto a sheltered plateau, and the smell of wood smoke thickens in the air, joined by the sound of many voices, a cacophony that must have sounded like thunder to ears used to the quiet murmur of 30 people. This is the seasonal aggregation, the great gathering where the scattered bands of the region coalesce like drops of mercury sliding into a single pool, forming a temporary city of tents and fires that pulses with a frantic, joyous energy. Here, for a few weeks in the summer or autumn, the isolation is broken and the human world expands. We see hundreds of people, perhaps 1,000, moving through the camp, a riot of faces and languages, old friends embracing with loud cries of recognition, news traveling from tent to tent faster than the wind. It is a festival of survival, a time to trade the rare stones and shells collected over the year, to share the new techniques for fletching arrows or curing hides. But most importantly, it is a time to fall in love, or at least to find a partner. The marriage networks of the Upper Paleolithic were vast, stretching across distances that would daunt a modern traveler, creating a safety net that spanned continents. A young woman from the Rhine might find a mate from the Danube. A hunter from the plains might join a family from the coast. These unions were not just personal, they were diplomatic treaties, sealing alliances that ensured that when the herds failed in the west, the Western family could move east and be welcomed as kin, not invaders. Watch the exchange of gifts that cements these bonds, specifically the beads, for this is the era where humanity began to adorn itself with obsessive beauty. We see necklaces of fox teeth, bracelets of mammoth ivory carved into intricate geometric shapes, and thousands upon thousands of shell beads, each one drilled with painstaking care. These are not merely trinkets. They are the social security numbers of the Stone Age, complex signaling systems that tell a stranger exactly who you are, which lineage you claim, and who your people are. A specific pattern of beads on a parka could serve as a passport, allowing safe passage through unknown territory by signaling a distant relation to a local elder. The labor invested in these items is staggering, thousands of hours of polishing and drilling, which means their value was immense, a physical currency of trust that circulated through the network, binding people together in a cycle of giving and receiving. We see a grandmother placing a necklace of perforated shells around the neck of a young girl from a different band, a gesture that says, "You are one of us now," dissolving the boundaries between them and us. It is a moment of profound expansion, realizing that the definition of family is not limited by biology, but can be extended by ritual and agreement. The atmosphere at these gatherings is electric with social friction and release. There are dances that last until dawn, the rhythmic stomping of feet on the frozen earth, creating a drumbeat that resonates in the chest, the sound of bone flutes weaving through the smoke, the telling of the great myths that belong to everyone. It is here that the culture is standardized, where the style of a spear point or the motif of a cave painting is agreed upon, creating the broad techno-complexes that archaeologists track across maps today. But eventually, the season turns, the leaves begin to fall, or the herds move on, and the great gathering must disperse, the temporary city dissolving back into the landscape. The goodbyes are heavy, for in a world without letters or phones, to part is to accept a silence that may last for years or forever. We watch the new couples departing, looking back at the families they are leaving or leading their new partners toward a strange horizon, their figures growing smaller against the vast backdrop of the steppe. Yet, they do not leave empty-handed. They carry the genes, the ideas, and the promises of the wider world. The silence returns to the valley, but it is not the empty silence of before. It is a silence filled with memory and connection. The network holds. The invisible threads that were spun by the firelight of the gathering now stretch taut across the snow, spanning hundreds of kilometers, vibrating with the knowledge that out there, beyond the reach of the eye, there are others who know your name, others who will open their tent flap if you appear out of the storm. This global connectivity, this refusal to be isolated, was the secret weapon that allowed us to encircle the planet. While the Neanderthals seem to have lived in smaller, more local loops, Homo sapiens built a world where the horizon was not a wall, but a bridge, a place where the smoke of a distant fire was an invitation, not a threat. As we drift away from the fading echo of the gathering, back out into the solitude of the open plains, we feel a sense of awe at the sheer scale of this social web, a network of love and obligation built entirely on trust, stretching across the ice like a safety net woven from the strongest sinew, catching us when we fall and pulling us, generation by generation, toward the future. Look down now into the open palm of the hunter sitting by the fire, where a single object rests, heavy and strange against the calloused skin, an object that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a piece of deep glossy darkness that stands in stark contrast to the white world outside. This is a core of obsidian, a fist-sized lump of volcanic glass that has traveled further than any living human in the camp, a silent pilgrim from a distant land of fire that has found its way into the land of ice. It feels impossibly smooth to the touch, cool and slick like wet ice, but unlike ice, it does not melt. It is eternal, a piece of the earth's molten blood frozen in time. If you were to ask the hunter where it came from, They might point vaguely to the south, to a land they have never seen, a place of smoking mountains and warm earth. For this stone was not born here on the sedimentary plains of the steppe. Chemical analysis, the modern magic that allows us to read the fingerprints of geology, tells us that this specific piece of rock was quarried from a volcano in the Caucasus Mountains, or perhaps the Carpathians, over 2,000 kilometers away from where it now rests. It is a staggering distance, a journey that crosses mountain ranges, swollen rivers, and hostile territories. Yet the stone made the trip. It did not fly, and it was not carried by a single hero on an epic quest. Instead, it moved like a ripple across a pond, passed from hand to hand, from band to band, in a slow, relentless relay of exchange that spanned centuries. Imagine the journey of this single stone, quarried by a grandfather in a warm valley, traded for a pile of soft furs to a traveler from the north, carried in a pouch for a season before being gifted to a cousin at a summer gathering, then traded again for a supply of dried fish, moving north, always north, gaining value with every mile it traveled from its source. By the time it reaches this fire, it is no longer just a rock. It is a treasure, a legendary object imbued with the mana of distance and the mystery of its origin. But why? Why go to such lengths for a piece of glass? The answer lies in the edge. Watch as the hunter prepares to work the stone, holding a hammerstone of river quartz in one hand and the obsidian core in the other. The strike is fast, a blur of motion followed by a sharp, high-pitched crack that sounds like a pistol shot, and a flake of the black glass flies off, spinning into the dust. Pick up that flake, carefully, very carefully, and you are holding the sharpest object in the history of the world. Even today, with our lasers and our surgical steel, we cannot manufacture a cutting edge as fine as obsidian. When it breaks, it fractures down to a single molecule, an edge only 30 angstroms thick, 500 times sharper than the sharpest razor blade you have ever used. It does not tear the flesh, it separates the cells, sliding between them so cleanly that the body sometimes does not even realize it has been cut. To a people whose lives depend on the ability to process meat, to cut through tough mammoth hide, and to carve wood, this material is not a luxury. It is a superweapon, a technology that reduces the labor of survival by an order of magnitude. A spear tipped with obsidian does not just puncture, it glides, creating a wound that bleeds freely, bringing the animal down faster and safer. We watch the napper work, their movements economical and precise, reading the grain of the glass, though it has no true grain, predicting how the shockwave of the strike will travel through the silica. It is a high-stakes game, for one wrong blow can shatter the core and turn the precious trade good into useless dust. The floor around them is littered with the debris of this process, razor-sharp flakes that glitter like black diamonds, a hazard to bare feet, which is why the workspace is carefully defined. As the tool takes shape, a long leaf-shaped blade, translucent and smoky at the edges, we realize that we are watching the original global supply chain in action. The existence of this stone here proves that the Ice Age world was not a series of disconnected bubbles, but a pulsating, breathing organism of commerce. We see the relay trade in our mind's eye, a vast, silent bucket brigade of goods moving across the continent. It was not just obsidian that traveled, it was Baltic amber, gleaming like solidified honey, moving south to the Mediterranean. It was seashells from the Atlantic, moving east to the Russian plains. It was high-quality flint from the Paris Basin, ending up in Poland. These materials moved along the mammoth superhighways, the beaten tracks worn into the earth by the migrating herds and followed by the humans. Some researchers suggest that specialized traders may have existed, individuals who spoke multiple dialects and enjoyed safe passage, moving like blood cells through the veins of the continent. But it is equally likely that the stones moved through the marriage networks we saw earlier, gifted from in-law to in-law, a dowry of sharp glass. The value of the stone is not measured in money, for there is no currency, but in its utility and its story. To own a piece of obsidian is to hold a connection to the wider world, to possess a fragment of the earth's power. It implies that you are well connected, that your band has friends who have friends who know the way to the fire mountains. The hunter holds the finished blade up to the firelight, and the orange glow passes through the thin, smoky glass, revealing the chaotic flow lines of the lava that cooled thousands of years ago. It is a moment of communion with the deep earth. They wrap the base of the blade in a piece of soft leather to protect the hand, or perhaps haft it onto a short handle using birch tar and sinew, creating a knife that will serve them for years. When this knife is eventually exhausted, resharpened until it is too small to use, it will be discarded, perhaps tossed into a midden heap where, 20,000 years later, an archaeologist will pick it up, wipe away the dirt, and feel the same thrill of connection, tracing the chemical signature back to the specific volcano that birthed it. The stone outlasts the user. It is the permanent witness to the impermanent human life. We can imagine the conversation that accompanied the arrival of this stone, the questions asked about the land it came from. Is it true the ground there is warm? Is it true the sun shines all winter? Stories that expanded the mental map of the tribe, giving them a sense of the scale of their planet. The obsidian is a physical piece of information, a hard drive storing the data of distant geography. As the hunter places the new knife carefully into their sheath, we feel the weight of the network that brought it here, a web of hands stretching across the frozen wasteland, passing the stone along, defying the distance, defying the isolation, ensuring that even in the deepest winter, the fire of the volcano can be held in the hand of a human living at the edge of the ice. It is a reminder that we have always been a trading species, that the urge to exchange, to swap, and to move goods is as fundamental to us as the urge to eat, and that long before the Silk Road or the container ship, the globalization of the world had already begun, carried in the pouch of a walker moving quietly through the snow, carrying a stone that is sharper than steel and older than memory. From the sharp traveling edge of the obsidian blade, we move now to a softer, more fluid medium, leaving the open, wind-scoured plains to descend into the heavy, velvet silence of the underworld. For the people of the Ice Age did not only live under the vast sky, they also journeyed deep into the throat of the earth to leave something behind that was not a tool for survival, but a tool for memory. We find ourselves standing at the mouth of a cave, not the shallow, smoke-filled rock shelters where daily life happens, but a deep, dark fissure that leads into the limestone heart of the hill, a place where no sunlight has ever touched, and where the air smells of wet stone, clay, and the mineral breath of the planet itself. To enter here is to leave the time of the sun and the moon and enter the time of the stone, a terrifying and holy transition that requires a courage we can scarcely imagine. We follow the artist, perhaps a woman or a young man or an elder, as they crawl through the narrow, twisting passages, their way lit only by the trembling flame of a fat lamp held in a shaking hand. The darkness here is absolute, a physical weight that presses against the eyes, making the small bubble of light feel like the only reality in the universe. Finally, the passage opens into a cathedral-like chamber, the walls soaring up into the gloom, and here, in the flickering light, the rock begins to move. We are looking at the great painted panels of the Upper Paleolithic, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, names we have given to places that were known simply as the Deep or the Source. But we must cast aside the modern notion that this is an art gallery, a place to quietly admire beautiful pictures of animals. This is not decoration. It is an information system, a vast immersive library written on the walls of the dark. The animals painted here, the bison, the horses, the lions, and the rhinoceros, are not static portraits. They are encoded data. Look closely at the belly of the painted mare. It is swollen, heavy with foal. Look at the stags. They are shown with their mouths open, belling in the autumn rut. These images are capturing specific moments in the seasonal cycle, locking the behavior of the animals into the stone so that it can be taught and remembered. Recent observations suggest that the series of dots and lines often found next to these animals are not abstract doodling, but a proto-writing system, a lunar calendar marking the mating seasons and migration times of the prey, a survival manual painted in red ochre and black charcoal. The artist works with a visceral intensity, grinding the iron oxide into a fine red powder, mixing it with cave water or animal fat, perhaps even holding the pigment in their mouth to spit it onto the wall, literally breathing their own life onto the stone. They use the natural contours of the rock to give the animals three-dimensional form, letting a bulge in the limestone become the shoulder of a bison or a crack in the wall become the ground line for a herd of deer. In the dancing, unstable light of the fat lamp, these figures do not sit still. They appear to breathe, to run, to shift their weight. Some animals are painted with 8 legs or multiple heads, which looks like a mistake in the harsh light of a modern electric bulb. But in the flickering stroboscopic light of a fire, it creates a primitive animation, a motion picture of a lion charging or a horse tossing its head. This was a cinema of the dark, a multimedia experience designed to overwhelm the senses. And it was not just visual, it was sonic. Scientists who have mapped the acoustics of these deep caves have found a startling correlation. The places with the most resonant echoes, the spots where a hum or a chant is amplified into a thunderous reverberation, are often exactly where the most dense paintings are found. It seems that the cave was an instrument played by the human voice. Imagine the experience of an initiate, led into this pitch-black void, their senses deprived, until suddenly the lamps are raised, the painted eyes of 100 animals stare down from the walls, and the sound of chanting begins to boom and echo around them, the cave itself singing the story of the hunt. It would be a moment of psychological transformation, imprinting the laws of the tribe and the secrets of the animals deep into the subconscious. This was where the chaotic, frightening world of the ice was ordered and explained, where the knowledge of survival was sanctified. But amidst the grand herds and the powerful predators, there is a smaller, more intimate mark that stops the heart. Scattered across the walls, often hovering around the animals like ghosts, are hands. They are stencils, created by placing a hand against the cold rock and blowing pigment over it, leaving a negative image of the palm and fingers surrounded by a halo of red or black. We drift closer to one of these hands, hovering just inches from the surface, and we feel a sudden, collapsing vertigo of time. This is not a symbol of a hand, it is the shadow of a living person who stood exactly where we are standing, 20,000 years ago. We can see the shape of their fingernails, the curve of their thumb, the unique topography of their skin. Analysis of the finger ratios suggests that many of these hands belong to women, challenging our assumptions about who the artists were. Were they the grandmothers we saw by the fire, the mothers encoding their knowledge, or were they adolescents leaving a mark of their passage into adulthood? There is a desperate, beautiful urgency in this gesture, a shout of, "I was here," that echoes across the millennia. It is a touch across the abyss. They are reaching out from the rock, palm open, not in a fist of aggression, but in a gesture of presence, of contact. We feel the urge to place our own hand over theirs, to close the circuit, to tell them that their message was received, that we are still here, that we still remember. The air in the cave is cool and damp, preserving these pigments with a miraculous stability, sealing them in a time capsule that has outlasted empires and civilizations. The silence returns as the chanting fades in our imagination, but the energy remains. We realize that these people were not just surviving, they were thinking, dreaming, and projecting their minds into the future. They understood that their own lives were short, fragile sparks in the wind, but that the stone was eternal, and if they could merge their story with the stone, they might live forever. The cave is a womb of memory, a place where the human mind first began to externalize its thoughts, creating a backup drive for the collective consciousness. As the artist packs away their pigments, wiping the red dust from their face, they take one last look at the work, the bison that will run forever, the hand that will never age. And then they turn back toward the narrow passage, crawling upward, back toward the cold, uncertain world of the surface, leaving their dreams burning in the dark, waiting for us to find them. The lamp fades, the shadows reclaim the chamber, and the animals are left to run in the silence, a secret kept by the earth until we were ready to listen. The silence of the Ice Age is a physical weight, a vast, crushing blanket of snow and wind that seeks to bury the world in quiet. But against this monolithic silence, humans deployed a weapon as sharp and precise as any obsidian blade, yet made entirely of air. We drift now from the deep painted echo chambers of the caves back to the intimate warmth of the hearth, where the firelight dances on the faces of the band, and we listen for a sound that cuts through the howling gale outside, a high, piercing, bird-like melody that rises and falls with a heartbreaking clarity. It is the sound of a flute, carved from the hollow radius bone of a griffin vulture or the wing of a swan, an instrument so light it feels like nothing in the hand, yet so powerful it can change the emotional weather of the entire group. This is not a primitive whistle or a child's toy. It is a precision-engineered musical instrument capable of playing complex pentatonic scales that would sound hauntingly familiar to your modern ear. To make such an object required a deep understanding of acoustics and anatomy, the maker carefully measuring the length of the bone, smoothing the mouthpiece to a perfect angle, and drilling the finger holes at mathematical intervals to ensure the notes rang true. Why would a people living on the edge of survival, constantly battling the cold and the hunger, spend precious hours crafting a delicate tube of bone? Because music was not a luxury. It was a survival technology, a mechanism for social synchronization that was just as vital as the needle or the spear. When the flute player begins, his breath turning into song, a subtle shift occurs in the room. The tension of the day, the hyper-vigilance of the hunt, the anxiety of the storm, the interpersonal frictions of living in a small space, begins to dissolve. Neurochemistry tells us that music releases dopamine and oxytocin in the brain, lowering cortisol levels and inducing a state of calm connection. The flute is a medical device, a stress regulator that treats the collective nervous system of the tribe. We watch the listeners' bodies relax, their breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the melody, their eyes softening as they drift into the shared headspace of the song. But the flute is rarely alone. It is joined by the deep, resonant heartbeat of percussion. We see others picking up rattles made of mammoth ivory or striking large, flat bones that have been suspended to ring like bells. In some sites, we have found massive mammoth scapulae, shoulder blades, worn smooth in specific spots, evidence that they were used as drums, pounded to create a thundering bass-heavy rhythm that you would feel in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. This rhythmic entrainment is powerful magic. When a group of people moves together, breathes together, and listens together, the boundaries of the individual ego begin to blur, and the group becomes a single, cohesive entity. This muscular bonding made the band stronger, more cooperative, and more willing to sacrifice for one another in the face of danger. The music was the glue that held the social contract together. And beyond the firelight, out in the vast, featureless landscape, music served another, more practical purpose. It was a map. Before there were paper charts or GPS, there were song lines. We can imagine the hunters moving across the steppe, humming a specific rhythm, a chant that encodes the geography of the land into a memorable sequence of sounds. The high note is the mountain peak, the trill is the rushing river, the low pause is the dangerous bog. By singing the landscape, they could navigate vast distances without ever getting lost, the melody guiding their feet like an invisible rail. This mnemonic power of music allowed them to carry encyclopedias of knowledge in their heads, histories of ancestors, behaviors of animals, locations of water, transmitted perfectly through the generations because the rhyme and the rhythm prevented the data from corruption. A story might change in the telling, but a song locks the words in place. We listen to the voice of the singer now, rising above the flute, a voice that is raw and unpolished but rich with the peculiar power of the human instrument. They are singing of the sun, of the return of the herds, of the spirits that live in the wind, and in the darkness of the tent. The song feels like a shield, pushing back the terrors of the night. It is a defiance of the silence, a declaration that we are here, and we have a voice. The music connects them not just to each other, but to the animal world from which the instruments came. To play a flute made of a vulture's wing is to borrow the voice of the bird, to bring the sky down into the earth. To beat a drum made of mammoth skin is to summon the thunder of the herds. It is an act of transformation, a shamanic bridge between the human and the non-human. We see a child, eyes heavy with sleep, listening to the lullaby that has been sung for 10,000 years, a melody that says, "You are safe, you are loved," and we realize that music is perhaps the oldest language of all, speaking to parts of the brain that existed long before words were invented. The sophistication of these instruments, some dating back over 40,000 years, tells us that the caveman was not a grunting brute, but a creature of immense aesthetic sensitivity, capable of creating beauty in the midst of the void. They understood that survival was not just about keeping the body warm, but about keeping the spirit alive. As the final note of the flute hangs in the air, trembling like a suspended drop of water before fading into the silence, the feeling in the room has changed. The fear is gone, replaced by a quiet, focused unity. The storm still rages outside, the temperature is still lethal, but inside, the hearts of the people are beating in time, stitched together by the invisible thread of the song. They lie down to sleep, the melody still echoing in their minds, a soft, rhythmic comfort that carries them through the long darkness of the Ice Age night, waiting for the sun to rise on a world that they have sung into submission. The wind picks up again, whistling through the cracks in the bonehouse, but now it sounds less like a threat and more like a harmony, a counterpoint to the music of the human soul that refuses to be silenced by the cold. And then, after thousands of years of the predictable ringing silence of the frost, something shifts in the texture of the air, a subtle softening that begins not with a bang, but with a sound that has been absent for eons, the relentless, maddening sound of dripping water. We have reached the moment of the great unraveling, the end of the world, as the Ice Age hunters knew it. We often imagine the end of the glacial period as a joyous relief, a Disney-esque spring where the flowers bloom and the birds sing, but for the people of the Mammoth Steppe, this was not a liberation. It was an apocalypse. The climate did not shift gradually over centuries, giving them time to adjust. Scientific records from ice cores in Greenland tell us that the temperature skyrocketed, in some places rising by 10 degrees Celsius in the span of a single human lifetime, perhaps even in a single decade. Imagine being a child born in a world of hard, white permafrost and dry winds, and dying as an elder in a world of sinking mud, constant rain, and stifling, humid heat. It was a trauma of planetary proportions. The first sign is the rain. For 20,000 years, moisture had fallen as clean, dry snow, but now it falls as cold, gray liquid, turning the solid earth into a treacherous, sucking bog. The mammoth superhighways, those hard-packed trails that allowed easy travel across the continent, dissolve into impassable swamps. The dry grass, the golden fuel of the ecosystem, rots in the damp, replaced by mosses and shrubs that offer little nutrition to the great herds. We watch the hunters standing on a ridge, looking out over the valley they have walked for generations, but the view is gone. The open horizons are being choked by a new, alien invader, the forest. Birch and pine, exploding northwards in the warmth, colonize the steppe with terrifying speed, closing in the sightlines, hiding the predators, and breaking up the vast herds that once flowed like rivers. To a people used to the freedom of the open plains, the forest is a claustrophobic cage, a dark, tangled mess of roots and shadows where the old hunting strategies no longer work. You cannot drive a herd of bison into a trap if you cannot see them. You cannot throw a spear through a wall of trees. The technology of the spear thrower, optimized for long-range engagement in open spaces, becomes less useful. The heavy, tailored fur clothing becomes a sweating, suffocating burden in the damp air. And then there is the silence of the animals. This is the hardest thing to witness. The megafauna, the biological partners of humanity for millennia, begin to falter. The woolly mammoth, that supreme master of the cold, finds itself over-insulated and overheating in the new world. Its metabolism, tuned to the dry steppe, cannot handle the deep, wet snows of the warming winters that crust over with ice, locking away the food beneath an unbreakable shell. We see them struggling in the mud, their massive feet, designed for firm ground, sinking deep into the thawing permafrost, exhausting themselves in a landscape that has turned against them. Their numbers crash, the great herds fracturing into small, isolated ghosts drifting north, chasing the retreating ice in a desperate bid to find the world they were built for. The humans watch them go with a sense of profound abandonment. These animals were not just food, they were the source of shelter, tools, fuel, and spiritual identity. To see the mammoth vanish was to see the foundation of culture crumble. The bones for the houses are gone. The fat for the lamps is gone. The gods are leaving. But the water does not just fall from the sky, it rises from the deep. As the great ice sheets in the north begin to collapse, shedding billions of tons of meltwater into the oceans, the sea level begins its inexorable climb. The vast, fertile plains of Doggerland, the heart of Europe's settlement, are slowly swallowed by the North Sea. This was not a sudden tidal wave, but a relentless generational flooding that forced people to pack up their camps and move inland year after year, retreating from the encroaching salt. We can imagine the smoke of the campfires on the coast, looking back at the islands that used to be hills, knowing that the burial grounds of the ancestors, the sacred caves and the best hunting grounds are now lost beneath the gray waves. The map of the world is being erased. The land bridges that connected the continents are severed. Britain breaks from Europe, becoming an island. Alaska separates from Siberia as the Bering Strait fills with water, cutting off the two halves of humanity for the next 10,000 years. The global network we saw earlier, that web of trade and marriage, is torn apart by the rising tide. The world becomes smaller, more fragmented. The psychological toll of this transformation must have been staggering. The elders, whose value lay in their memory of the past, suddenly find their knowledge obsolete. What use is knowing the migration route of the reindeer when the reindeer are gone? What use is knowing how to build a bone house when there are no bones? The authority of the past is broken by the chaos of the present. We sense a rising anxiety in the camp, a feeling that the pact between the earth and the human has been violated. The old rituals no longer bring the animals. The old prayers are drowned out by the rain. The people are forced to adapt or die, and many surely died. The population density drops in many areas as the carrying capacity of the land collapses. The surplus time, the time for art, for beadwork, for the slow meditative craft of the Ice Age, evaporates, replaced by a frantic daily struggle for calories in a landscape that is stingy and unpredictable. Yet, even in this catastrophe, we see the spark of human resilience flickering in the damp air. We watch them experimenting with new tools, crafting microliths, tiny sharp stone blades to attach to arrows, a weapon better suited for the ambush hunting of the forest, deer and boar, than the open field battles of the past. We see them turning more intensely to the rivers and the lakes, exploiting the fish and the waterfowl that thrive in the wet new world. They begin to gather hazelnuts in massive quantities, processing them to replace the fat of the mammoth. It is a darker, harder time, a time of mud and uncertainty, but they do not give up. They are shedding the skin of the Ice Age specialist and becoming something new, something grittier. The romantic, moonlit clarity of the steppe is gone, replaced by the messy, teeming complexity of the Holocene. As we drift over the changing landscape, seeing the green encroaching on the white, the water swallowing the land, we feel a deep, aching melancholy for the lost world, a realization that the caveman did not just evolve into us, they survived the end of their universe. They stood on the shore as the water rose and watched their golden age drown, and then, with heavy hearts and empty hands, they turned their backs on the sea and walked into the forest to build a new world from the wreckage of the old. The ice is gone. The dream is over. The reality of history has begun. The air's heavy now, thick with the smell of rotting leaves, wet moss, and the cloying sweetness of pollen, a dense, humid blanket that clings to the skin and makes every breath feel like drinking warm water. We have entered the new wilderness, the chaotic, explosive bloom of the Holocene, and while the sun shines brighter and the days are longer, the feeling on the ground is not one of liberation, but of a strange, claustrophobic confinement. The vast golden horizons of the steppe, where a hunter could see a herd moving from 10 miles away, are gone, erased by the relentless march of the trees. We stand in the shadow of the great primeval forest, a tangled green wall of oak, lime, and hazel that stretches unbroken from the Atlantic to the Urals, a landscape that feels secretive and jealous, hoarding its resources in the dark undergrowth. To the people who remember the stories of the open ice, this is not a garden. It is a labyrinth. The hunting has changed, becoming a desperate high-stakes game of hide and seek. The great herds of bison and horse have vanished into the deep woods or retreated to the shrinking grasslands of the east, replaced by the red deer, the roe deer, and the wild boar, skittish, solitary ghosts that vanish at the snap of a twig. There is no more harvesting of meat. There is only the stalking, the waiting, and the endless frustration of the chase. We watch a hunter moving through the bracken, his body painted with mud to break his outline, holding a bow, the new weapon of the woods, silent and quick. But his face is gaunt, his eyes darting nervously into the shadows. He works harder than his grandfather ever did, spending days tracking a single animal that provides only a fraction of the calories of a mammoth. The abundance of the Ice Age, that strange paradox of the frozen feast, has been replaced by the broad-spectrum hunger, a need to eat everything and anything to survive. We see the women and children bending low over the forest floor, gathering hazelnuts by the thousands, their fingers stained brown by the husks. They are processing wild grasses, snails, turtles, even waterfowl, resources that require immense labor for small returns. It feels like a demotion, a fall from the aristocracy of the megafauna hunters to the peasantry of the foragers. And in the warm, stagnant air of the forest, new enemies arise. Not saber-toothed cats, but invisible killers. The parasites, the ticks, the mosquitoes breeding in the thawing swamps, the bacteria that thrive in the heat, they begin to take their toll. We see evidence of new diseases, of bodies weakened by a diet that is high in frantic variety, but low in the sustained high-fat density of the past. The teeth, once clean and strong, begin to show the first signs of decay. The cavities of civilization appearing as humans turn to sticky, sugary starches to fill the void left by the meat. In the Near East, where the drying climate pushes people together into the few remaining oases, we witness a pivotal moment of desperation that we have misunderstood for centuries as a triumph. We see people building permanent stone houses, not because they want to settle down, but because they have nowhere else to go. They are harvesting wild grains, wheat and barley, with sickles made of flint, grinding them in massive mortars that are too heavy to move. This is the birth of the Natufian way of life, the uncomfortable pause before the invention of agriculture. It is not a discovery. It is a trap. By settling down to guard their patches of wild grain, they are giving up the freedom of the movement, tethering themselves to a single spot on the map. We watch them tending the fields, pulling up weeds, watering the soil, and we realize that for the first time in history, humans are working. The original affluent society of the hunter-gatherer, with its leisure time and its naps in the afternoon, is dying. In its place comes the dawn of labor, the sunrise to sunset grind of the farmer who is terrified of the drought. We feel the tension in these early villages, the social friction of living in larger groups without the release valve of migration. When a dispute arises, you can no longer just walk away to the next valley. You are stuck here with your heavy grinding stones in your stone house. We see the first walls built not to keep animals out, but to keep other people out. The concept of mine begins to harden like clay in the sun, my field, my grain, my storage pit. The egalitarian circle of the Ice Age fire begins to fracture, replaced by the vertical hierarchy of those who have and those who have not. Yet, amidst this grinding shift, there is still beauty, and there is still the stubborn ingenuity of the survivor. We see them domesticating the wolf, turning the old rival into the dog, a companion that helps them navigate the thick forests and guard the camps. We see them inventing new ways to cook, to ferment, to store. But the mood is different. The awe of the great caves is gone, replaced by the anxiety of the granary. The art becomes smaller, more abstract, less about the majestic soul of the animal and more about the geometry of the human world. The spirits of the land seem to have retreated, or perhaps they have just changed their names. We drift over a settlement at the edge of a drying lake, watching the smoke rise from the clustered roofs. And it feels like the end of childhood, a transition from the wild, dangerous freedom of the youth to the heavy, responsible burden of adulthood. The world is green, yes, and the birds are singing, and the ice is a fading memory in the north, but the humans below look tired. They are surviving, as they always have, but the cost of survival has gone up. They are trading the deep time and the deep connection for security, trading the horizon for the fence. It is a necessary trade, perhaps, a response to a world that no longer offers its bounty for free. But as we watch the sun set over the first fields of wild grain, casting long shadows across the bent backs of the harvesters, we cannot help but feel that something has been lost. A wildness in the blood that will sleep now for 10,000 years, buried beneath the soil of the farm and the foundation of the city, waiting to be remembered in our dreams. The new wilderness is here, and it is we who are the wild things now, tamed by our own need to eat, caught in the web of our own making, standing on the threshold of history with dirt under our fingernails and a strange new hunger in our hearts. And now, as the camera of our imagination pulls back for the final time, rising up through the canopy of that ancient forest, drifting higher through the layers of mist and time, passing through the centuries like clouds, through the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the rise of the stone cities and the steel towers, we find ourselves returning gently to the room where you lie, to the quiet, dark space of the present moment. But as you settle back into your own body, feeling the weight of the blanket and the softness of the pillow, do not think that you have left the Ice Age behind, for the truth is far more intimate and strange. You have not been watching a story about strangers. You have been remembering yourself. Walk to a mirror in your mind's eye, or simply feel the topography of your own face in the dark, and you will see the ghost of the mammoth steppe staring back at you. When you feel the sudden sharp prickle of goosebumps on your arms in a cold breeze, that is not a mistake. It is a physical memory, your body trying to fluff up the fur of an ancestor who has been dead for 20,000 years, a reflex encoded in your skin to trap warmth that you no longer need to trap. When you feel a sudden, inexplicable jolt of anxiety at a strange noise in the night, a racing heart that demands you freeze and listen, that is not a disorder. It is the gift of the grandmother who heard the cave lion when everyone else was asleep, the hypervigilance that kept your bloodline unbroken. When you crave sugar and fat, feeling a deep biological pull toward the calorie-dense foods that damage us today, do not judge yourself too harshly, for you are answering the call of the tundra, obeying the ancient imperative to store energy against a winter that will never come. You are a biological machine built for a world of ice, living in a world of central heating, and every instinct, every reflex, every shadow in your subconscious is a souvenir from that long, white silence. The people we met, the seamstress with her needle, the firekeeper with his bone coal, the child listening to the flute, they are not gone. They are folded into the double helix of your DNA, living on in the shape of your hands, the color of your eyes, and the way your mind seeks patterns in the stars. You are the vessel they built to sail across deep time. They survived the crushing cold, the starvation, the loss of their world, and the flooding of their land so that you could exist, here, now, warm and safe. It is a staggering realization, a heavy and beautiful crown to wear, knowing that you are the unbreakable link in a chain that stretches back into the deep dark. You are the victory. Every breath you take is a testament to their stubbornness. Every beat of your heart is an echo of the drums that beat in the mammoth bone houses. We often look at the past with pity, thinking of our ancestors as primitive, struggling wretches, but perhaps we should look at them with envy, for they possessed a clarity of purpose, a deep integration with the earth, and a community of trust that we spend our whole lives searching for. They did not just survive, they loved, They created, they cared for the weak, and they found beauty in the most hostile environment on earth. As you lie here, drifting toward the edge of sleep, feel the presence of that vast, invisible family standing around you, not as ghosts to haunt you, but as a guard of honor. They are the ones who walked through the whiteout so you could walk in the sun. They are the ones who kept the fire burning so you would never have to know the true dark. The ice has melted, the mammoths are dust, and the seas have risen, but the human spark, that resilient, creative, enduring flame, has not gone out. It burns in you. You are the Ice Age survivor. You are the memory of the earth. And as the final image of the snow-covered plain fades from your mind, replaced by the warm, safe darkness of your own sleep, know that you are held by a strength that is 25,000 years old, a strength that has already weathered the worst the world can do, and which will carry you, effortlessly and gently, through the night and into the morning. The journey is complete. The fire has burned down to embers, the wind outside has quieted to a whisper, and the vast white world of the past has settled gently into the archives of the night. You have walked with giants, sat by the hearth of the ancestors, and felt the cold breath of the glaciers. But now it is time to let the history dissolve into rest. There is nothing more to learn, nothing more to remember, only the soft, rhythmic breathing of your own body, safe in the here and now. Let the images of the ice and the stone fade like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind only a sense of deep, ancient peace. You are part of a story that never truly ends, but for tonight, the chapter is closed. Drift away now, carried by the river of time, held securely in the quiet dark. Sweet dreams.